Can I ask someone to close the doors outside so we can make sure we're quiet? And since we are recording, there's some sign-in sheets that are going around. With respect to if you're here at the front table or at this bargaining table to please sign. And I believe this marks our fifth bargaining session to be at the table tonight. And it is November the 4th, 2024. And Eva, is there anything else that I forgot that you want on the record?
Nope.
All right.
All right.
So tonight we are here with several items to discuss. And we have mutually agreed that the first item we want to discuss is a proposal that specifically addresses in the teacher contract articles 3.3, 3.4, 6.3, 6.3-1, dealing specifically with planning time. So with that, Stephanie.
All right. So last session on September 30th before the hurricanes, we had received your counter to planning, which just in summary kind of rearranged planning around, but gave us a net zero of planning. It didn't give us any more, didn't give us any less. It rearranged planning time. So our committee is rejecting that. Even though we like some of the aspects of it and we have some of the aspects of your proposal in our proposal, but overall, you know, our committee and our bargaining unit, it's important for us that we have more self-directed plan time, not just a net zero. And so there's three pieces that we will be passing around. I'm going to give about half to you guys. This is teacher 6. And there's three pieces that all work together. And then we have Article 3 in the teacher contract for the school calendar. And I did 40, so I think we're good. And then para Article 8. So we'll look at the teacher Article 3 first, but I'll wait for you guys to get your. So in the employer proposal from September 30th, Article 3 was actually for the most part the okay part of the planning. And it's in line with what we're proposing in front of you today, that out of the 10 non-student contact days for teachers, currently we have 6 as teacher work days and 4 as staff development. We are proposing that 6 goes to 7 for teacher work time, and 4 staff development is reduced to 3 staff development days. In the early dismissal days, the 10 early dismissals that we've had over the last couple years, looks like we will be extending those from the approved calendars and the calendar committee, and we are proposing that all 10 of those early dismissals are for teacher plan time. And that was in line with your part that you had proposed on the 30th. Now, in light of the storms, since we last met, for the 24-25 has been amended. For this calendar year, we are asking that the January 7th full staff development day is changed to a full teacher work day. And with the early dismissals that we have to make up, we have 7 on the books and 6 of those have to be used for storm makeup days. We are proposing that the March 14th early dismissal be changed back to an early dismissal instead of a full student day. That is the end of the 3rd grading period, and we are asking for that to be teacher plan time, and that the May 16th early dismissal that is slated as staff development be changed to a full student day to be the 6th for the early dismissal that we have to make up for the storm. And then moving forward, the calendar would reflect what we've proposed. In para 8, And 8.3-2 with our CDAT paras that are our pre-K, they're part of our pre-K teaching staff with our CDAT. That their planning would also mirror what's outlined in the teacher planning for Article 3. With everything that I've just outlined. Because they are also expected to plan for their classrooms as well. And then with Article 6 teaching conditions, the 6.1-5, and I'm just going to note it here, just as in Article 8 in the para, the 30-minute lunch is in both of those articles as well, and that language is remaining the same for at least 30 consecutive minutes for lunch. And then the planning time in teacher Article 6 is on page 6 of 12. And I only printed what was necessary because the other 6 pages don't have any proposed changes on them. We would be proposing to strike through the early dismissal language for staff development because those would no longer exist. They would be full teacher planning days. So these are all together is the proposal for planning time.
Okay, thank you. Okay. The next, are there any questions from staff for clarification otherwise? Because what we will do is take your proposal back and review it and then provide feedback or go from there. The next item that we would like to move to is a salary proposal review with respect to one of our main priorities tonight is going to be to discuss fund balance. And I want to talk about how we got here tonight and some of the proposals and the numbers that bring us here. This begins with June 26, 2024. PEA proposed an initial presentation of $47,278,850 for a salary proposal. That was the first proposal when we came together in June. One of our first bargaining sessions was a proposal of $47,278,850. On 8/1, we came together again, bargaining. And at that next bargaining session, the district proposed a value of $20,228,036, which is enough to cover a 4% overall increase for employees covered by PEA. Now, I want to put it on the record that the value of the $20,228,036 covers, it was a proportionate amount of over 8,000 employees, covers over 70% of the workforce. So that was an allocated value that was put on the table that's adequate to meet an overall 4%. We came back together after PEA reviewed the 4% proposal presented by the district, and the next date we met was on 8/19. And on that date, PEA rejected the district's 4% proposal. And the remarks were offered that we would like to wait for the annual financial reports to come about from the district. And that delayed bargaining until we waited for the closeout of those end of year proceedings, the fiscal year. We came back together on September 30th following the review of those annual financial reports. And PEA countered with a second proposal. That second proposal increased in value by $447,098. That proposal put on the table the second time was more than the first, and it was $47,725,948. I do want to ask from that proposal, in which there was an increase of $447,000. Stephanie, we did talk about the fact that there were errors on the OTP and the SLI proposals of 930 that was presented by you. We did discuss the fact that those proposals for those groups had to be corrected to reflect the proper movement on the chart.
Mhm.
They were previously moved 3 levels rather than 2 levels. And I'm asking the question tonight so we can have confidence in the numbers of the proposals that you presented, even though they're outside of the distance between our offer and yours. Does the chart of those corrected values result in any changes to the numbers of the
No.
proposal?
It was only a transcription error when it said that they were moving 3 levels, but it's been costed out that with our original proposal with OTPTs hasn't changed since June 26th.
Okay.
And they were moving 2 levels based on because their salary schedule is different. It's differently structured than the pay for performance schedules are. And so everything's costed out with a 2-level move with a 2% increase into their,
All right.
in addition to the level movement.
Thank you for clarifying those numbers. The district later remarked in that same meeting that we had no counter, and the original offer of the 20 million that I've already spoken to remained on the table. And there was a distance that's remained between these proposals of over $27 million. Not a few million, not 7 to 10 million, $27,700,000. And we offered at the time that that was a distance that was just too great, especially when we were waiting on a counter that was more than the original. The counter that you provided was more than the original proposal. So I want to be clear that tonight the district again is rejecting the 930 union proposal of 47,725,948. The offer of $20,228,036 remains on the table. Again, stressing the fact that that is enough to provide 4% overall for PEA groups. The distance that are between the proposals relative to the PEA's proposals and what we put on the table, it comes at the core level from a discussion that we need to have regarding fund balance. And so tonight, the district's chief financial officer and chief of staff that oversee the district's budget in excess of $2.2 billion is going to explain and walk us through the fund balance for the district while keeping a fund balance that's compliant with board policy of 5%, and also explaining state statute with a 3% emergency provision where the state comes in and reviews our fiduciary responsibilities. This fund balance directly impacts the monies available for salaries. So it's important and it's key for us to take a moment and stop and pause and walk down through the fund balance, what it means, how it's derived, and how it impacts salaries tonight. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce and hand it over to Jason Pitts and to Heather Jenkins.
All right, good evening. I'm going to attempt to show the presentation that we're going to walk through on the display and each of the displays in front of you. So give me just a second. See if I can do this. Got number 1. Number 2. I think I deserve a round of applause for doing that myself. But okay. All right, I don't have a microphone with me, so I'll do my best not to be too quiet so all of you can hear me. So we did have a meeting with PEAs, how you want to say, your representatives, maybe almost 2 weeks ago, to go over how the district calculates fund balance. There was at the at the last couple meetings, I think that there was a significant difference between PEA's calculation of fund balance and what our calculation of fund balance is as a district. Try to make this not as boring as it really is, but it is boring. So, fund balance. It's going to read from this per Florida statute 1011.051, the superintendent shall provide written notification to the board and the commission or education anytime the portion of the general fund ending fund balance not classified as restricted, committed, or non-spendable and the district's approved operating budget is projected to fall below 3% of the projected general fund revenues during the current fiscal year. So when we talk about a fund balance requirement and the state's requirement, this is what we are referring to. When we are projected to fall below 3% in our fund balance, we're supposed to notify the state. Anything below 3%, and then we are in emergency conditions as the state statute outline. Second bullet point, in addition, board policy 6233 states anytime the portion of the general fund's ending fund balance not classified as restricted, committed, or non-spendable and the district's approved operating budget is projected to fall below 5% of projected general fund revenues during the current fiscal year, the superintendent will notify the board. The board's taken additional steps above and beyond the 3% and has set a district-wide minimum of 5%. So the state sets that minimum of 3%, and the school board has adopted a policy that the general fund ending fund balance, this is important, not classified as restricted, committed, or non-spendable, will not fall below 5%. So we've put up there what the formula is to actually calculate fund balance. So there's 5 categories of fund balance. This is extremely boring, and I see the faces out there. It's extremely boring. But there's 5 categories of fund balance. We have restricted, committed, non-spendable, and those are essentially categories in which you cannot spend those funds without the board taking action. The other 2 categories are assigned and unassigned. So when we talk about the district's fund balance, it is the assigned and unassigned categories divided by the projected general fund revenue for that year. So when you're looking at financial reports, it excludes transfers and the beginning fund balance. So that's the calculation of fund balance. So this chart shows the last 5 years, the fund balance that we ended with. So in 1920, we ended with a 6.37% fund balance. In 2021, we ended with 8.1% fund balance. 21-22, we ended with 9.34%. In 22-23, we ended with 8.1%. And in 23-24, we are ending with a 10.28% fund balance. Now, our actual fund balance, the next column, is our actual fund balance excluding the ESSER funds. ESSER funds were the federal monies that the federal government provided in response to COVID. So had we not had those ESSER funds, our fund balance would have been in 1920, 4.35%. In 2021, it would have been 6.59%. In 21-22, it would have been 4.57%. In 22-23, it'd be 3.82%. And in 23-24, it would have been 5.39%. The third column shows our projected fund balance excluding ESSER, our initially projected fund balance. Fund balance during budgeting times is a projection, okay? Because we're submitting a budget in the July time period. That's our initial budget. The board adopts an adopted budget in September. So we're projecting a year ahead of time where we think we're going to end at the end of the year. So that third column shows what we projected our fund balance to be, excluding ESSER. In 1920, it was 3.05%. In 2021, it was 5.37%. In 21-22, it was 4.32%. In 22-23, it was 3.73%. And in 23-24, our initial projected fund balance was 5.06. The last column shows the difference between what we projected fund balance to end at and what our actual ending fund balance was. In 1920, the difference was only 1.35 or 1.3%. In 2021, the difference was only 1.22%. In 21-22, the difference was only 0.25%. In 22-23, the difference was only 0.09%. And in 23-24, the difference was only 0.33%. That is very close. I mean, those percentages are minuscule in my estimation for projecting a year ahead of time. Now, this slide is to show what the district is allocated and compensation for the PEA bargaining unit. I'm sorry. In 24-25, the 20.2 million amounts to a 4% raise for all employees in the PEA bargaining unit, not just teachers. Over the last 3 years alone, the district has invested $28 million to maintain health benefits for its employees. That's to maintain the single employee premium of $0 a month. And so in 1920, although no dollars were allocated for raises, the district invested $4 million to keep that monthly premium free for its employees. In 2021, the district allocated $15.2 million in raises. There was $4.7 million for longevity retention bonuses paid, with $4,080,000 for insurance, for a total compensation package of $24.0 million for the PEA bargaining unit. In 21-22, there was $7 million allocated for raises. There was $10,213,937 in longevity retention bonuses that were paid, and $6.1 million was invested to maintain that free monthly insurance premium, for a total of $23.3 million in total compensation for the PEA bargaining unit. 22-23, $15.5 million allocated for raises. There was $9.1 million given in longevity and retention bonuses. Another $4.5 million was invested in the insurance plan to keep that monthly premium at $0. That was a total compensation package of $29.2 million. 23-24, $16.4 million allocated for raises, $9.1 million for longevity retention bonuses were paid. Another $10.2 million was invested in our insurance plan to keep that monthly premium at $0 for a total compensation package of $35.7 million. Here in 24-25, the district has offered $20.2 million in raises. At the moment, $0 are needed for the insurance plan. However, that could change before the end of the year. So I say all of that to point out how important that insurance plan is and how much dollars have been devoted to that insurance plan. And again, that was just for the PA bargaining unit. The district invested over $33 million in ESSER dollars in one-time payments for retention bonuses. That's that second column. That total is $33.3 million. Why is that important? ESSER, the revenue that we enjoyed, I'll call it enjoyed, from the federal government, helped artificially inflate our fund balance. These boring slides just show how that occurred. And if you go back to the first slide, which showed how we calculate fund balance, these slides show how the one-time ESSER dollars inflated our fund balance. You can see at the bottom of this slide that in 2021, the financial condition ratio is the same verbiage as the fund balance. We ended with 6.59%. We would have ended, or we did end at 8.1%, but it was because of those one-time ESSER dollars. The next slide shows the same type of information for 21-22. We would have ended at 4.57% had it not been for the one-time ESSER dollars. In that year, it was $40.5 million that went into our general fund, helped us end at 9.34%. 22-23, we would have ended at 3.82% in our general fund had it not been for the $39.8 million we received that year in ESSER. Those ESSER dollars helped us end the year at 8.1%. In 23-24, we would have ended at 5.39% if it were not for the $49.6 million in ESSER dollars, which helped us end at 10.28%. 24-25, fund balance remains higher due to non-reoccurring revenue from 23-24. Had it not been for that ESSER revenue, we would be projecting that we would be ending at 3.08% instead of the 7.8% that we're currently projecting for an actual ending fund balance. The slide just shows our projected, our budget revenues. This information is what you need to calculate fund balance. So this slide is presented just as backup for how the district calculates fund balance. I know that everybody wants to read the information on that slide. This slide shows our actuals, and help me here. Our actuals excluding ESSER. So Heather Jenkins, our CFO, helped me explain this slide here. So we're looking at the bottom percentages. Right, this slide is to help us look at the percentages at the bottom.
Yes, what this slide shows our actuals, it's giving you the picture of what our financials would have looked like had we not had that additional ESSER revenue. As a comparison, and then Jason will get to the last slide, which shows what we reported on the annual financial report, which does include the revenue offset by ESSER dollars.
The actuals is reported in the AFR includes one-time ESSER revenue. So those percentages at the bottom tie out to what is in our AFR. Right. That was the end of my presentation. That's the presentation that we gave to PA representatives. We asked PA representatives to give us any questions about what we presented, and we haven't received
Got them
any
today.
questions.
All right. So thank you for that. We felt it was really important that not only a small group hear your presentation, but the whole bargaining unit had an opportunity to hear what we were able to hear 2 Wednesdays ago. So we do have questions. First, I would like to, so how we've always calculated fund balance when we're looking, and I think you described it actually in our meeting as cash on hand is your unassigned fund balance.
Cash on hand on June 30th.
Yes.
One,
Yes.
1.1
Yes.
specific day of the
Yes.
entire year.
Yes, and so how we've always calculated the fund balance when it comes to bargaining, and this came as when I first came on from Mike Perone and Angela, who was here, in Wilfredo's position. We always looked at unassigned, never assigned, plus unassigned because the assigned is allocated somewhere else already because it's assigned. And so when I went back after our meeting and recalculated, I got the same numbers that you did, because the only difference between our fund balance and your fund balance is you guys add assigned in. And so we were only looking at unassigned. We never added transfers into the denominator for revenue or anything like that. It was just revenue. And so we came up with the same exact numbers that you guys have presented at every budget meeting or every AFR, because it's important for us to help you understand where we're coming from, is we're only looking at unassigned to your projected revenue with not anything else added in like transfers or things like that. And so when we presented our district summary budget projected fund balance versus the AFR actual fund balance, the numerator was just unassigned and the denominator was just projected revenues with nothing else added in. And so when you add assigned in, it's making the numerator bigger and the denominator staying the same. So your percentages for your ending fund balances are bigger than what we even presented, because we're only looking at your unassigned when we're trying to see what actual cash, like you kind of described it, is available. And so I didn't make copies for everybody, but I wanted you guys to have one of that, and I'll send that in the electronic copies that we send later on. So, and I don't think that we're here to refute numbers, because the numbers are your numbers. But we do have a lot of questions about your proposal. And so these are really in no particular order, but as you're talking about the PEA contribution over the last 5 years, when you're looking at the longevity retention bonuses, those all came out of ESSER. And I think when we're talking about ESSER, it's important to understand that the what if we didn't get ESSER doesn't matter, because we got ESSER. We know it's over. We know that it sunset on September 30th, but we got those dollars, and actually almost to the tune of $400 million over a 3-year time period, and 33.3 million of the 400 million went to longevity or retention bonuses for the PEA bargaining unit. And so out of the first column where you have dollars allocated for a raise, from the 2020, 2021, and to now, how much of this money is district money and how much of this is categoricals through like teacher salary increase allocations or other dollars that are earmarked specifically for instructional or staff raises? Do you,
We'll take
Okay.
your questions.
Okay.
And respond accordingly, but we're not gonna, we won't be able to respond to those questions
Okay.
right now.
okay. I think if my memory serves me, since these were all years that I've been in this position, I believe a majority of the money is the teacher salary increase allocation. And that's been one of our frustrations is getting our employer, the board, to put in some of their own money to make our raise packages a little bit more comparable to surrounding districts.
That
Also talking about this page, when we were kind of digging through, the AFR, Angela had noticed, and Angela is our bargaining specialist for FEA. Angela had noticed that some of the categorical line items weren't spent down all the way. So, and I can also, I'll send you guys a copy of these questions too, so that you guys have them. But we wanted to ask how much money is left over in the categorical line items of things that we have to pay for that have been released into the base student allocation now. I think this has been year 2 that the legislature changed that to where categoricals that were categoricals that you couldn't touch have now been lumped into the base student allocation. And so we still have an obligation to pay them, but they're not necessarily categoricals anymore. And so how you understand what I'm saying?
So one of them that you're probably referring to is instructional materials.
Mhm.
And we've been covering that from ESSER money for several years. So those dollars are earmarked for the adoption. If you could give us specifically which ones you're asking about, we can definitely let you know.
Okay. All right. Okay. And so going back, we know that the ESSER federal dollars are not hypothetical. We received them. We know that the funding is over now. And so since the ESSER funds have sunset at the end of September, the federal government did allow for some flexibility with projects that couldn't be completed by the end of September. Whether things were on back order or like HVAC units where we couldn't get supplies, things like that. What amounts are still encumbered from previously outstanding projects assigned from ESSER funds? Because at this point, the ESSER dollars are in our general revenue because we were able to spend them on things. And now that's, as you were pointing out, that's artificially inflated the fund balance. So those funds are sitting there because we were able to pay for them out of this instead of out of general. And so we're wanting to know specifically which projects are still encumbered that we're still paying out of ESSER, that's true ESSER money at this point. The other question as we were going through your presentation was when we're looking at the salary 100 line item in the AFR and the district summary budget, what % of positions are included in the salary 100 line item? Are you budgeting for 100% of your positions? If not, what % do you typically budget for when you're creating your budget?
We budget for 100%.
So follow-up question to that then, what percentage of positions have been filled over the last 5 years? Like how many vacancies tend to go unfilled? Like, I guess to that point, what we're wondering is why would we budget for 100% knowing that even in the best of times, we never had 100% filled? When I've been talking to other of my colleagues, They floated that 95, would be budgeted, knowing that you kind of always have this perpetual vacancy, even not in the shortage that we're experiencing now. Another wonder we had, looking at transfers. The employer tends to transfer between like 50 and 70 million from capital, which is permissible, to offset some of the operational costs. We're allowed to transfer some money from capital to make it operational. What's the max amount that the employer can transfer from capital funds into operational?
That's set by statute. It's a dollar amount per FTE. We'll
Okay.
do that, whatever the current,
Okay,
we'll give that to you.
all right.
That's the maximum. There's a maximum set by statute.
Yeah. Okay. I was having trouble finding it, so we wanted to ask that question.
That-
Yeah, it
It's
changed.
it's around $100 per FTE. That could be a little more. 170.
I'm not 100% on that.
I'm not either.
Okay, all right.
Because it changed.
Gotcha. And then another thing, when we started digging in a little bit deeper.
And don't let,
no,
let me-
go ahead.
let me go back
Go
to
ahead.
that.
To the
That-
capital?
Yeah,
Okay,
that capital transfer, I want to make clear the reason that we do that. We have facilities and maintenance employees that work on maintenance related issues, which is a capital expense. But we budget and pay for their salaries out of general fund. So we're allowed to transfer capital revenue, which is a different type of revenue,
hmm
which we don't, that's not where most of our salaries are budgeted in the general fund. So that revenue is a different type of revenue. We're allowed by statute to transfer some of that revenue to cover salaries for those maintenance staff.
okay,
So that's why we do that. And it's a total allowable. It's not what I don't want anyone to walk out of this meeting with is that the district somehow has smoke and mirrors or is doing some sort of financial shifting of money to not pay or not increase salaries. There is no reason that the district would do that. There is no reason that the district would not put all available dollars out on the table for salaries. There's just no reason for us not to do that. However, we are charged with maintaining a sustainable budget every year. Okay, and those are how we, put forth a proposal from our side and what the district can afford every year. It's a sustainable amount. I just want to say those ESSER dollars were one-time funds.
Mhm.
It is not,
Jason, I'll add to that, because we shared this in that smaller group meeting, and it needs to be disclosed here. So there are a lot of school districts that will move the capital funds after the fiscal year to artificially deflate their fund balance. We do not do that. We're very transparent about how we do this. We do maximize our transfers to cover those salaries. That allows us a buffer in our general operating budget. Additionally, there are other districts, and your FEA, whoever she is, consultant, confirmed that in our meeting, that there are other districts that will hide money at the school level. We do not do that either. So the fund balance is the fund balance. So the question about capital, the percent can vary from year to year. We'll be happy to give you that. But everything we transfer there goes directly to salary and benefits. It does not cover other projects and needs. So that's an important thing to clarify, because otherwise our fund balance would be even lower than we're currently at.
all right. Thank you for that. When we were looking at specifically the materials and supplies 500 line item, just for instructional, And I just we went back to the 1920 school year. Because as I was doing a difference analysis of budgeted versus actual, this really popped out at us. And so with just the instructional part of the materials and supplies 500, in the 1920 school year, you budgeted 19.2 million, we spent 11 million. In 2021, 32.6 million was budgeted, we spent 14. 21-22, 35.4 million was budgeted, we spent 15.9. In 22-23 and 23-24 seem to be outliers, and I think maybe that's where some ESSER dollars came into play. We budgeted 72.8 million in that line item and spent 24.1. In 23-24, we budgeted 87.5 million in that line item and spent 12.6. And this year, we seem to be back to what we've regularly budgeted at 39.1. But it seems that adding up these five, the annual financial report for the instructional materials and supplies 500, on average, over those 5 years, since the 1920 school year, we've only spent an average of 15.6 million in that category. And so if we are looking at possibly moving money around to put into the general salaries 100 to help pay for the package that we're proposing, it seems like we could come down pretty significantly on the materials and supplies and move that into salaries. So that was an area where we found some money that could be moved over into the salaries 100 instead of the materials and supplies 100.
So you're asking about materials and supplies that were budgeted
Yeah.
only in function, a function that begins with a 5? Is that what
Yes.
you mean by that?
So right here in the materials and supplies 500, just in the instructional part. Yeah, just the instructional materials, not everything else.
But
We
that's-
just looked at
What I'm
that one.
saying is that is our categorical for adoptions, what you're looking at most likely there. And what happens with that is we get 14, 15 million for the year. It doesn't cost us that. It costs us more than that. We encumber all of it. And sometimes we don't receive it in that fiscal year, so then it rolls into the next year. So then that budget also rolls for that categorical to cover that.
Was that
Sometimes
one of the
it's-
categoricals that was freed up in the based student allocations?
Sometimes it takes 2 years to save the money for an adoption, and it wasn't technically freed up. It was rolled, the categorical was dissolved, the funds were rolled into the base student allocation, but the obligation to provide the instructional materials still maintains. So we still have to buy those. We just don't have a specific category to buy them from anymore. And another piece is the instructional material allocation was given to us as a categorical, therefore it has to be spent on instructional materials, even though we're a couple years down. Those, whatever remains from that original categorical is still restricted, because that's how those funds are recorded. The way it comes in is the way it has to be spent.
And that relates to one of your earlier questions about which categoricals have
Yeah,
basically gone away.
yeah.
Instructional materials is one of those that's gone away as a categorical.
Mhm.
So those funds don't remain in a restricted line
Yeah.
like they used to.
Well, and I guess that to our point, if we're looking at what we budget versus what we spend, and we can go back even further, but like I just did from the 1920 school year over 5 years, even though we have adopted, we've done a textbook adoption since the 1920 school year. We still budget way more than we actually spend. And since that is one of those line items that has been changed to where we have more flexibility, that is possible dollars where we could move that.
You need to be careful saying that we have the flexibility. I think that some people are assuming that means we can completely allocate the entirety of that funding to something else, and that's not true. You still have a statutory obligation is to procure construction materials. We still have an obligation to provide school safety and security. So those costs are real.
Mhm.
While they provided us flexibility, the flexibility we provided was if there are remaining funds,
Mhm.
then you may be able to move those funds to other projects. But that does not mean that you can allocate the entirety of those funds. And I think what they shared here, and I think that's the important part that has to be reiterated, is essentially you're rolling funds for multiple years because we do not adopt every single content area every year for obvious reasons, because your affordability would not be there. We're not allocated enough funds to do that. So we will be happy to do the analysis because you're looking at multiple years,
Mhm.
happy to show this is what was saved each year. Because while in 2020, 2021, our adoption may have been mathematics, we're saving up for ELA, saving up for social studies, saving up for
Mhm.
science. So I don't want there to be a misrepresentation that those dollars are just sitting there and that they're available, because they're not. They're being saved, rolled into a subsequent year to cover the costs of that adoption. But we'll be happy to help.
I guess where my follow-up question comes is that looking at 5 years of history, knowing that we don't adopt every subject every year, that would be silly. And we wouldn't have the resources to do that anyway. Even when we have adopted, we have habitually spent less than that line item just for the instructional part. And so that's where our wonder came, is that if we're meeting our obligation to purchase instructional materials, and then we have $20 million left over, we have the flexibility now through the legislature to move that into another, because it's all grouped in the
Yeah.
base student allocation.
I think you need to allow us to create a crosswalk for you to show each year that the savings begin year 1, year 2, year 3 for ELA and how that rolls into subsequent years, because the premise of your assumption is correct. I think what needs to be shown is the map of how we get there, because you're always going to spend less because you're always saving more into subsequent year to cover the next adoption.
Mhm.
So we can provide.
And on a quick glance, it's not just instructional materials, it's IB, ACE, AP, various other
Mhm.
pieces other than instructional materials.
Okay.
There's a lot.
So in your presentation, and when we talked in the small group, can you talk to us a little bit more about the deficit spending? On page, well, there's a few of them. I think they start with page 9 and 10.
Oh, don't ask me. Yes,
I think it's 9,
Yes, sir.
10, and 11.
all right. Have it maybe on one. Let's see.
Can you clarify deficit spending?
So that was a term that Jason used in our small group.
The line that says excess
Yeah.
deficiency revenue over expenditures.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, is that on one of the ESSER slides or the summary slide?
It says it's on, I think it's your page 9, including the title page, where you start with budget, projected revenues and or that part of this, and then page 10 and page 11, the actuals. And it starts with the 2016, 2017 school year. I guess our wonder there was, I know that if you're just looking at revenue, projected revenue versus actual revenue, but then we also know that there's always money that we transfer in to cover, like Jason was saying, with the capital, with like maintenance workers, and we can move capital to operational, so we can cover some salaries and benefits from that because they are working on capital projects. So when you're looking at, you did the excess deficiency revenue expenditure line on the page 10 and 11. So this is not including anything that you would transfer in or anything like that.
It does. So what that is, if you want to look at 2016 census versus as an example.
Okay,
You have 722 million, we transferred in 31.9,
okay,
on the actuals page.
okay,
Our expenditures were 760 million, so that means we actually had $6 million more in expenditures
mhm,
than we did, including our revenues and our transfers in, and those dollars come from the fund balance. Now, within those expenditures, that could be anything, including health insurance expense or salary enhancements.
okay. Mhm. Okay,
So, again, in all transparency, because there were some people in the room that weren't. When we referred to deficit spending, I acknowledged in our last meeting that there's about $25 million I've got to cut out the budget next year to keep us whole. Otherwise, our fund balance continues to diminish. So that's contracted services, that's other things that we will have to exclude going into the next fiscal year. Now, thankfully, we operate over a $2 billion budget. So we're in 25 million should be easy to be found. But you've got to be able to do it without adversely impacting programs in other areas. So that'll be a conversation we need to have at some point, because in full transparency, we want to share that with you and other groups so that they know exactly where this fund's gonna have to come from. The majority of those will come from contracted services.
okay. Okay,
Heather, in case if I misspoke at the dollar amount. I think it was 25 to 28.
Yes, sir.
so as we've heard, several times now, us talking about the millage, at the last couple of school board meetings, we've now heard more information about the millage. A question that's come up from our bargaining unit, and from the bargaining committee, is that we would like to understand publicly why a millage wasn't placed on the 2024 ballot, and what are we doing to work toward it getting put on the 2026 ballot, knowing that we have revenue shortfallings.
We'll be addressing that with the board and with you today. But the justification was we were not opposed to that. We were looking for external consultants to assist us with that. We did have concerns that Polk County politics would be very similar to what occurred in Hillsborough County. So when they ended up in litigation with their city commission or county commissioners, you know, we took note, waited to see how the legal ruling would play out in our favor or against our favor. But again, there are two types of referendums, and millage may not be what we go after. We may go after a shared rate with the county, because that allows a 15-year period of time in which we can secure revenue versus a 4-year. And there are some additional benefits as far as flexibility with placing it on the ballot that don't exist for the others. It equates to about roughly the same amount of money in revenue for the school district. The only, and I shared this with you all in that same session, when we met, the only disadvantage you're at is, unfortunately, you are at the will of the county. The county can change the percentage. So typically, school districts that do a shared millage with their county government will see either 60-40 or 70-30 split. But the county can turn around subsequently and seek to modify that percentage. So obviously, that's a long-term concern. So you have to weigh the pros and the cons with both. The current political climate may not have been conducive to that, although there was a lot of discussion around it. If you recall, Mr. Lindsay proposed to the county commissioners that they go after a millage. We feel that partnering with them might be advantageous for all of us, because they get a win out of being able to address issues with infrastructure that they currently are not adequately funded to address, or that they have failed to address, unfortunately, due to lack of revenue or resources. We benefit, obviously, because we can subsequently run a subsequent or an attached referendum along with it that would allow us, because those are capital dollars, to be clear. But you can run a subsequent referendum or concurrent referendum that would allow us to convert those capital dollars to operational dollars, which go into salaries and benefits. So there's that opportunity, plus there's a traditional mill. And we'll have to see which one the board will support. We also have a change in board leadership. There's some other factors that are at play, but the board has asked me to do a more formal presentation in the near future so that we can start to set the stage for that. But I think what everybody needs to understand is that's a shared commitment. Once the board has received authorization, we're out. There's not much we can do. There are some significant legal restrictions as far as what we're allowed to do. And it will take everyone
Yeah.
to get that passed.
In the meantime, and this isn't necessarily directly related to the presentation, but indirectly. As the school board, as the employer is looking to redo their legislative platform, how aggressively is our board, our employer, going to lobby for funding changes in the interim?
There's, in particular, there's one that we're lobbying for, and that's the millage. Well, let me rephrase that. There's actually two that will have a significant impact on Polk County. First is the school change in school start times. That comes at over or approximately a $20 million price tag. But it also has other implications because with smaller primary grade children being released from school before their older age peers, after school childcare becomes an issue, and Hillsborough County and others that have made this transition in the past have basically seen their Title I allocation reduced because they end up spending that to cover the after-school care costs and trying in an attempt to staff it. So we're already working with after-school providers to see what options we have. So that's one piece that we're going after, because that will be a savings for us. If the state doesn't want to do away with it, we ask for flexibility, make it optional for school districts. We're not funded fully, as you know, for transportation as it is. So why add to that burden, knowing that there's a shortage, not only of drivers, there's a shortage of buses. You have to order a bus nearly 2 years ahead of time in order to secure a school bus. So there are issues with that. The second is the millage rate that we have, because a number of years ago, the state passed a law that allows that as your property tax revenue increases, your millage rate decreases at a commensurate rate. And I believe that Mr. Pitts, last time you calculated it, how much money have we lost as a result of that?
Well over $200 million had the millage rate just stayed the same.
So our advocacy is, number one, either modify that statute or that requirement. For example, for fast growing counties, you can almost understand why that was done. Unless you're a fast growing school district. The Florida funding mechanism allows for additional influx, or you get additional calculation if you have declining, you get the declining enrollment supplement. You could get a declining staff enrollment supplement in the current school model. You don't have that when you have rapid growth. So one of the things we're offering to the legislature is simply, obviously, we're asking for them to repeal it altogether, and allow us to set the millage rate. So everybody in the room understands, everybody listening, we are the only countywide agency that cannot set its own millage rate. The only one. And so we need to be we need more advocacy to change that. The other thing we would ask for is if they're unwilling to revert it back to the original language, is to ask them to prevent or to cap the decline for fast growing districts that can show increasing enrollment. And they can prorate it however they see fit. And I think that's a concession that might actually garner some support, but we'll see. But those are our two significant legislative platforms. Subsequently, quietly, I think everyone needs to advocate that we do away with limiting or restricting the time frame in which a referendum can be run. But again, that's not just district advocacy.
Yeah.
That's everyone advocacy.
Yeah.
And that's really the boat we miss sometimes. Large urban districts are coalescing around certain topics. So we'll see how it goes.
Will the FT formula that's kind of antiquated be a part of the legislative platform too?
So we'll see what Representative Tomko continues to strive for. I think she made great strides last year in providing more flexibility. But I think we need to continue to go after the base student allocation that is not adequate still.
Yeah.
IDEA is nowhere near adequately funded. Transportation is nowhere near adequately funded. So we've got to get to those places. The same way, I would hope that state leadership would aggressively pursue those interests as much as they did trying to move the base teacher salary. But maybe not as shiny to them as the other one.
Well, it impacts us more. Um. So we're also asking, because I think Jason also reiterated that your original 4% equates to $20 million. When we costed it out, we got 26 to 28, depending on what numbers you were looking at. If you were looking at increasing the base salary or not increasing the base salary. Can you, on your side, do a cost out like we would normally do? Like how you see my cost outs come to you, of what 4% actually looks like and what our, and check our numbers versus what our proposal is right now, so that we can see if we are looking truly at the same numbers. Because I ran it again and we're still looking at $20 million does not equal 4%. And so if you say that $20 million is on the table and that equates to 4%, and then we're costing out our proposals and we may not be as far apart as we think we are. And so we are requesting that you guys cost out what 4% would be for every single person, plus cost out our proposal like we've done, so that we can truly see if we're really that far apart, or maybe we're even further apart and we've got to talk through other things, but we really need the cost out for both your proposal and our most recent proposal.
Can you send us your?
I did that last time, so you should have everything. I've sent Ava everything, so if I need to resend it, I can, but Ava should have
Keep
everything.
in mind, it doesn't address the compression topic.
I understand.
We were clear about that 4% was.
We just were
to give
looking
everybody
at your
context.
pot of money.
Just looking for context, everybody
Yes.
get 4%, with the understanding, so when you ask us to cost it out as far as what we
Yeah.
put into new teacher salary, if that's what you're asking us to do.
Well, because you said every employee would receive 4% with,
4% across the board. is
and so
not-
that's what we're interested in seeing.
Okay.
So that we can make, yeah.
Let me understand though, what you're asking for is for us to cost out our proposal based on the way you cost out your proposal.
Yes. If possible. And I think that's how we've done it in the past, when JD and I have sat down, in previous years.
Do you send this one with 4% or are you just saying the one?
No. I can send you what I looked at when I costed out 4% to see, and I haven't sent that. I can send that so that you can see what I'm looking at.
Can you send that?
Yes.
Or one more clarification.
You're okay.
Are you asking that we verify the 4% number, or are you asking that we verify your proposal?
Both. So we want to see what 4% looks like across the board based on how like we cost it out, because, and I'll send you what I did with the 4% so that you can see what we're looking at. Because we think that might help move things along. And then as we're wrapping up the questions, and I will send you guys an electronic copy of the questions too, just so you have them. I know you guys have been writing them down. One of the questions that Mr. Pitts asked us in a small group, that he wanted a reply. We didn't really have a reply then, but we do now. He asked us, where is the distrust of our numbers coming from? And it's not that we distrust your numbers. Your numbers are your numbers. We're looking at the same numbers. When we calculated the unassigned and assigned together, we got the same fund balance that you guys presented in your presentation. So your numbers are your numbers. What we question sometimes, especially when we see, the materials and supplies and some other things that are over budget and underspent year after year. And when we're looking at allocations for projects versus, people, I think that we question sometimes the priorities. And that our salaries need to be a priority. And I think that that's where the friction comes in. And it's not necessarily your numbers. It's how can we put money into other line items that can benefit the people that are doing the work. Because our union represents 9,000 people that are in schools every day. And, you know, we're the reason that we're almost a B district, right? We're the reason that kids feel loved and feel cared for. And we're the reason that the whole ship keeps moving, right? We're the front line. We're with kids, and our business is kids and educating children. And so we need to better understand how that priority can be put into our salaries so that we don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs. So that as we're balancing our budgets, we're not $80 deficit spending either, or $100 deficit spending, or putting that money on credit cards because we can't afford to go pay for groceries. And so that's why this bargain is so important to us, because our job continues to get harder and harder and harder. If you have been in this profession for 16 years, like I have, it gets harder and harder every year. And if we are going to maintain teachers and staff that are high quality, certified to do their jobs, we have to maybe rearrange some of our budgeting priorities to make raises be in the forefront. Because if we're building more schools because we're busting at the seams and we don't have teachers and paras and secretaries to fill those schools, why did we just build a $200 million school? You know, if we're paying for programs to help people, to help kids better read and actually become proficient in reading and proficient in mathematics, and they understand how our government works and how science works and how critical thinking works, those programs don't matter if there's not people there to implement the programs. And so that's what we are looking for, is to ensure that the priorities are the same. And I think, knowing you guys on a personal level, I think your priorities are the same. We've got to make sure that the numbers are following those priorities.
So I will say, first and foremost, we are a B district. When you take out charter schools that take a school improvement rating to avoid getting a letter grade of a D or an F, you take them out of the calculation, we are a B district. All day, every day. So, and that is on the backs of our classroom teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodians. No one disputes the magic happens in classrooms. You'll not find another superintendent who supports instructional staff the way I have. You look at what we've done historically over the last 3 years, we show where our commitments are financially. We bring the best possible fiscal package forward while maintaining a 5% fund balance for my board. You saw historically, because of ESSER, I was able to spend well below the 5% to get to 3%. Because we knew we had ESSER funds to offset. And we've done as much as we can to cover staff. There will never be enough money. We will never be able to advocate for enough money. The fact that we have to go out for a referendum to adequately pay staff is inexcusable. No one disputes that. No one's more committed to going out and working and trying to, you know, I've had several board members who were hard no's, who are now hard yeses on going out for referendums and pursuing every option we have. But unfortunately, you know, we can only do what we can. Capital costs, you know, I can easily point fingers on my predecessors and say, well, this was the issue and this was the issue. And historically, we were flat in our funding. We declined in our funding. I can't blame them. The revenue wasn't there, quite frankly, and they had to make some tough decisions. I may have done it the same. I may have done it differently, but we are clawing our way out of that hole. And I think, again, you should look at our commitments. We got to the first year teacher salary as fast as we could, a full year, maybe a year and a half before it was mandated. with the sole goal of being able to reallocate all additional new dollars to address top compression. So I don't disagree with you. Nobody on this, in this entire school district, I'm not gonna say from the district team, because we are the team. We are all committed to the same things. But there's a financial reality we have to operate within, and we will fight like hell to find every dollar. But look at the history. $36 million was spent on every qualifying position that would otherwise fall under PEA umbrella. 36 million. But we do point that stuff out because it's important for people to understand that insurance comes at a cost. And this school district, and much to the board's credit, has never tried to pass that cost off to its employees because they said, otherwise, the minuscule raises we were given would be offset by maybe losing more money having to pay into the insurance plan. So you have strong board members who have continued to advocate to me and to others to make sure that we do the best we can in that regard. So you're absolutely right. There's nothing you said that we take issue with. In fact, we support what you said. And we need to work together. But it's also very clear that we need to communicate better. As you and I talked, we need to exchange information before meetings so that we can come up with questions to ask, so that these meetings can be far more productive. So, for example, had we had those questions, I don't know when you finalize those, had we had those, we probably could have responded to all of them tonight, rather than having to delay it yet again to another meeting, or provide a written response in a few days. But we need to do a better job of making sure people understand the finance aspect of it. So that there is no miscommunication. And you had some very good questions today about instructional funds and things like that. So absolutely. But that tells me, as it told me with my own board, I've not done a good enough job sometimes of making sure that while they approve a budget and they review it and they talk through it and they do all the steps, do they really understand fund balance? So it's not just them, and I'm not criticizing my board in any way. They do a great job, but we do have to communicate better. So I would hope that this is a good place for us to continue to ensure that those questions are being addressed prior to meetings or submitted prior to a meeting, and all documentation can be submitted prior to a meeting so that we can formulate questions, because it's very difficult to be asked, do you have a counter? We don't know what to counter, right? Because we don't know the questions being asked, we don't know what's being proposed. So I think that's an important piece moving forward as well. So I appreciate the fact that you guys were willing to meet with us, go through finance. I appreciate the opportunity to make sure we presented this here tonight. Appreciate the fact that we'll be able to send out a video link to employees to say, hey, if you didn't watch it, you need to understand school finance and ask any questions that they may have. But there are a lot of needs, as you pointed out. New school construction is just one.
Mhm.
You know, trying to address an aging infrastructure in our schools with schools that are 50 years old is a big problem. And while we passed the half penny sales tax, and those we've seen increased dollars come into there,
Mhm.
we've also seen costs go up 38–40% as a result. So we're not able to go as deep with our maintenance and repairs to half penny sales tax initiatives as we previously had anticipated. So
Would the board be interested in the legislative platform of bringing public education outlay dollars back to public schools instead of sending them to charter? Because in the last 5 or 6 years, we've gotten $0 from public education capital outlay.
if our correctly, they get funded from a different pot of money altogether for capital outlay, don't they, Kevin?
Well, I think we have received no PICO
We,
dollars.
There's an account, there's a fund.
that's correct. Stephanie's correct. Over the last few years, the limited PICO,
Mhm.
public education capital outlay dollars, 0 of it has gone to public schools. Years ago, that was a dedicated state capital revenue system or revenue source that was primarily funded by landline phone lines. So who has the landline phone line anymore? Most of those have gone away. So the very few dollars that remain that are available for those PICO have gone to charter schools in the last
Mhm.
few years. We've seen almost $0.
Nothing.
Are there any other questions from you at this time?
These were all the questions we had. If we think of anything else, as we're talking tonight, we'll send those over as well.
You're gonna email those?
Yeah, I'll
to
email
us?
those. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. When I, either tonight or tomorrow morning, I'll send Ava the 3 electronic files of what we put across the table with the planning time, and I'll send an electronic copy of the questions.
I think we're at a juncture in our meeting tonight where we kind of need to address maybe next steps. I know we had another item, but I think we're at a place that would be a good place for us to discuss
Okay.
What's next. I guess what I'm feeling in my spirit is we've got some questions to answer. We've
Mhm.
got the 4% workup that we're going to review.
Mhm.
You have presented to us the first piece today that we need to go back and review. We probably need to see about some prospective dates
Yes.
for another time to come together.
I know we have, right before Thanksgiving. Could we look at Tuesday, the 12th? I believe the board meeting's the 19th, correct?
Of November.
Mm-hmm. Or the 13th even,
What
the
was the
12th or the 13th?
The 12th. Or 13th.
We
I mean,
Could do Friday, the 15th as well.
I'm gonna offer we not do, I've already checked into some other calendar
Okay.
folks that need to be in attendance, and that's not an option for
Okay.
some of those.
Okay,
So let's look at the 12th or the 13th. That's a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
we could also do the Wednesday, the 20th. So we have 3 dates to look at. So can we confirm these by end of business tomorrow?
Yeah, give us some time. I don't know if I can pull off into business tomorrow because I have to also check on this
Okay.
facility.
Gotcha.
What we will do, and we'll survey the
20th.
3 dates we had on the record that we're reviewing are November 12th, 13th, or the 20th. And I would recommend that it be the same time, 5
Yep.
to 8,
5 to 8 works.
and we'll follow up to have a mutual agreement for another time we can come together.
Okay,
I want to say this on the record. So there's going to be response or otherwise to the
Mhm.
questions that have been presented by you today, right?
Mhm.
We have rejected your previous offer.
Mhm.
So that would then mean that the option or the presentation of the counter would then be
It's in our
on
court.
your side.
Mhm.
And so I would anticipate that if we have a hard date for bargaining, that would then be to discuss what
Mhm.
that next counter would look like.
Absolutely.
So we'll go from there.
So with the cost out in particular, because that's gonna help us inform moving forward, if the 12th and the 13th are 2 of our 3 dates, which are pretty early next week, would we be able to have the costs out on your end with what we've asked by Friday? So that we have some time to look at it over the weekend?
No.
I'm thinking we're gonna be trying to push for the 20th, because there was a lot of
Okay.
heavy lifting in the
Okay.
questions, and it wasn't just a single year.
Yeah.
You had multi-year
Absolutely.
pieces. And you know, this group is, they have an attention to detail and
Mhm.
accuracy, so I know they're gonna want to have
Okay,
time to research and give you the most accurate information back.
okay.
But we need a confirmation on a date very soon.
Yeah.
We'll give that to you separate
Okay.
and apart.
Well, when can we
But-
get that confirmation? Because the folks are gonna wanna know.
Sure, we'll get that to you as soon as we can. I'm gonna be getting it to you. I'm not gonna put a date. I've got to coordinate a place to meet.
Right.
And then I've got to coordinate, the folks that are in this room as well,
Mhm.
and I'll be communicating with her. I would like to have it to you by maybe
This Friday?
this Friday. It gives us 3 or 4 days, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
Yep.
Because we have multiple calls to make, multiple things to line up. You know how that goes,
Mhm.
and so do you. And so you also know that we communicate
Mhm.
with respect to the dates and when we come together.
Yep.
And we also know that as we communicate and determine a date, there's adequate time for you to
Mhm.
apprise your membership of when that meeting would be.
Okay. So with the questions, when we're looking at dates, I guess we'll get a date first and then kind of work backwards from that. Because we would need some time to look at those responses too, as we're looking at
I'm telling you, my first day,
formulating
I'm
an
gonna be
account
looking into this.
caucus or,
Checking
accountant.
that date first. Because I
Okay.
think we need the time.
Yeah, if we get the 20th, then that gives you time to work on your homework. Get it to us, we'll look at it, and then we should be ready
And
to
then
go
we've
by the
got our
20th.
homework.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
all right, thank you.
So with that being said, we'll go off record. We will close this fifth session of bargaining and we will get a date to meet.